Okay, look, we're live. So hey everyone, it's Brian Beutler, publisher of Off Message. I'm live this morning, Monday, September 29th, with Bharat Ramamurti. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think I
You're
am,
right.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Bharat was deputy director of the National Economic Council under President Biden and has recently begun publishing his own newsletter on Substack called The Bully Pulpit, which is very good and free, at least for the time being. So everyone tuning in from my end should go subscribe. I've wanted to connect with Bharat for a while now because I'm interested in the policy work you've done both for President Biden and then prior to that. Even though I don't think we've ever actually met in person, but then last week by sheer coincidence, we wrote more or less identical pieces on the same day about democratic rebuilding and the lessons from the post 2004 election environment. So I figured we should just start there, flesh out, our overlapping analysis, like how it is we came to write the same piece, basically, and then get into the role policy played or didn't play in changing economic fortune or changing democratic political fortunes back then versus what might await us in the future. So A, thanks for doing this, and B, if
Sure.
you want to say anything else about yourself, and then maybe summarize the piece that you wrote, and we'll
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brian. And as you said, I worked most recently in the Biden administration as a deputy director of the National Economic Council, which is basically the main advisory body for the president in the White House on economic issues. Previously spent 7 years working for Senator Elizabeth Warren as her top economic advisor, including on her 2020 presidential campaign, the one with all the plans, if you remember. So we were spending a lot of time working on that. And then before that, in between, also worked as an oversight commissioner for the CARES Act, appointed by Senator Schumer. So have been in politics and policy now for about 15 years. After leaving the White House, wanted to just do some of my own writing about some of the things that I learned about my times in politics. So that's this new Substack, The Bully Pulpit, where I'm going to try to write a few times a week about sort of the future of progressive policy. Less news of the day, more about where do we go from here and what are the ideas that can animate people going forward. So, as you said, most recently wrote a piece about lessons learned from recent history, given the frankly dire condition of the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
And I just think over the last week or so, whether it was Ezra Klein in the New York Times and some other writers have really emphasized, boy, the Democrats are in rough shape, even as Republicans are getting very poor marks for their governance. It's not like people are flocking to the Democratic Party because there is this concern about what the party stands for. And it reminded me, as a younger person, of the coverage of the Democratic Party in the George W. Bush era, 2005, 2006, where if my piece starts with a bunch of quotes that look like they could be from 2025, but they're actually
Mhm.
from 2005, about how the party has no direction and so on. And of course, within 3 years in 2008, we had the White House, we had a 60-40 Senate seat majority, and we had about a 75 seat majority in the House of Representatives. And so the point was things can change quickly.
Mhm.
And the path between where we are now and there, based on that 2005 2008 experience, isn't really clear. I mean, what happened was a combination of extremely poor governance by George W. Bush on Katrina, on Iraq, Social Security privatization, and the emergence of a dynamic, party-defining candidate in Barack Obama, who really reshaped what it meant to be a Democrat and the national brand of the Democratic Party. What it didn't involve, in my view, was a significant shift to the center on policy. Again, a lot of people are saying right now what we need is to significantly moderate where the party is. Obama didn't do that in 2008 relative to John Kerry, who lost in 2004. What instead was, this is a fresher party, a younger party, a more dynamic party because of the nature of the candidate, combined with really poor governance by the Republicans. And so I think there's a lesson there, and we can talk about things we learned from 2012 and 2022, which I think are similar lessons. But to me, the question is, what is the future? And I think the answer might be somewhat unsatisfying, which is it's more about events and candidates and a little bit less about the nuances of particular policy.
Yeah. So I think people who have been subscribed to my newsletter for any amount of time will recognize these ideas because I write about them all the time. And like the it's funny to me because I kind of straddle the world of like liberal wonks and maybe the more progressive half of the party. And it's funny to me because I remember the post 2004 period really well. Like I can feel the similarities between today and back then, basically every day, all the time. And I remember all of the ink spilt trying to convince Democrats to um, uh, broaden or to trim their sails and meet people where they are at the time, it was move to the right on religious grounds, like religious cultural grounds. And like that's where you're going to find the reasons why you lost to George W. Bush. And then there was like a group of writers, mostly like new to what was then the blogosphere, like the new blogosphere, who said this is silly. What you need is like a compelling policy vision, and that will unify the party against the Republican Party, which is mostly out of ideas at this point, and through that you'll end up winning. And so the party ended up actually doing that, and then they won.
Yep.
And it's funny that like 20 years later, many of the same people who were pushing in that direction 20 years ago are now saying what the doomsayers at the time were saying. You got to move to the right. You got to meet Republican voters where they are
Yep.
specifically, and that policy ambition is actually like to your detriment. It will complicate the goal of winning back power. And it's not that I've stayed exactly in the same place, because I think I used to view the role that policy played 20 years ago as very important. And over time, I've come to view the way George W. Bush failed himself, and then the way Democrats exploited his failures, as much more central to the story of what happened between 2005 to 2008. And so, like, for all the years I spent writing about policy, like I spend all my time now thinking like almost like Mitch McConnell, how do you get Donald Trump to be less popular? How do you expose more people to the many ways he's a failure and a fraud, and then ride his unpopularity back to power? So that's sort of like how I see, like there's like such clear parallel between 2005 and 2025. But the people kind of like advising the party on where to go have shifted around for reasons that I don't fully understand, actually, to give like kind of diametrically opposite arguments. But I do think that like whether policy is immaterial or helpful to the cause of rebuilding, it's clear the 2005 to 2008 example, I think, really does demonstrate that it's not fatal, right? Like that if you survey the landscape of the country and find problems and think that you have policy solutions that might fix them, and you put them in an agenda and you run on them, the ambition of the policy agenda itself is not going to turn off voters in such large numbers that you can't beat a president who's down at 35% popularity, or a party that's down that low. And so my like the refrain I keep coming back to as a result is that, like, as long as the policy ideas that you think might be responsive to need in the country aren't for some reason toxically unpopular, you can you can just support them, figure out compelling ways to talk about them, and it's not going to be this albatross around your neck when it comes time to ask people for their vote. Is that sort of more or less how you see things too?
Yes. I mean, I think the popularity of our policy positions is probably the 50th highest problem for the Democratic Party, honestly. And look, again, it's not just with Democrats. You'll remember that after 2012, when Romney lost to Obama, the RNC did a big autopsy, and the main point they made was we got to move to the center on immigration, because that's how we recover our standing with Hispanic voters and other minority voters. And of course, Donald Trump very much did not do that and won in 2016, and then in 2024, winning more minority voters by taking the most hardline position on immigration possible. And so, I just think that there is always this philosophy that if we with subtle nuances in our policy positions, we can recapture new slices of the electorate. And I just think that a lot of people don't view politics that way. And as ungratifying as it is for somebody like me, who is a policy nerd, who has spent 15 years of his life working on the details of policy. The truth is, I think that um, the old fashioned things in politics still matter. Are you a compelling person? Do you seem authentic? Do you have charisma? Are you good at talking extemporaneously about policy issues? Are you comfortable in a variety of settings? You know, how is it that Donald Trump has won two general elections while taking horribly unpopular policy positions? Pardon the January 6th defendants. It's one of the most unpopular things ever. It was the thing that he repeated over and over again. He still won. Why is that? I think it's because people associate him, rightly or wrongly, with a kind of anti-elitist, screw the establishment ethos that I think was in keeping with where they were, and they were willing to overlook policy concerns. I saw something the other day that Zoran Mamdani has a positive favorable rating from 18 to 29-year-old conservatives, self-described conservatives. So is that because they're really attracted to his policy positions, or is it because he seems like a compelling figure? Why is it that Bernie Sanders is consistently the most popular politician in America, including with self-described moderates and independents? Is it because of his policy positions, or is it because people say, I don't necessarily agree with this guy on everything, but he seems like he really cares about what he's talking about, and he doesn't seem to waver off his positions based on whatever the polling data is. In fact, I think that there is a real risk to Democrats that if they come across as too poll tested and finger in the wind, that reflects and exacerbates a deeper problem, which is that people don't really trust the party to do what it says it's going to do, or that it's going to take on the hard choices that have to be made when governing. So, my takeaway in my piece was basically, rather than spending all of this time and energy on should we move 2 clicks to the right or 2 clicks to the left or whatever on policy, let's try to work together on a compelling, short set of engaging ideas about what the party wants to do, right? The same thing with the Republican Party. If you vote for the Republican Party, you're voting for lower taxes, deregulation, and border enforcement, right? People could probably rattle that off. If you say the same thing to people, what do you get if you vote for the Democratic Party? You'll probably get 45 different answers. And I think it would be really good to be able to say you're going to get, free college and universal, childcare and universal pre-K or whatever the case may be. Pick your ideas, make sure that they're compelling, and you can fit them on a bumper sticker and go from there. And I think that matters way more than again, the nuances of your policy positions, including on social issues.
So I agree with that in almost full measure, but I do think that if somebody was trying to pick apart your argument, they would point to Mitt Romney and Donald Trump and say Donald Trump was actually right and the Republicans who wrote the autopsy were wrong. That basically what happened is Mitt Romney lost because while he had a very right-wing immigration agenda of his own, the centerpiece of his policy agenda was this regressive tax and Medicare privatization plan. And that doomed him. It was policy that did in Mitt Romney. And what Donald Trump's genius was realizing that immigration is galvanizing for immigration restrictionism specifically is galvanizing for Republican voters, but that it only works if you also ditch the regressive anti-New Deal, anti-Great Society glue that had held the conservative coalition together for so long. And I think that that explains that is a story that connects all the dots between 2012 and 2016, and it does kind of cut against the thesis that we're talking about here, that policy isn't important. So I wonder what you would say to that pushback, or to similar pushback on the flip side, where the people who think of policy moderation as kind of a panacea would say, look, Barack Obama, he pretended unconvincingly to be against same-sex marriage. Zoran Mamdani is abandoning sort of old, further left positions to adopt ones closer to the center in his own race now, even though I think he would win without doing that. And Bernie Sanders, especially in 2016, had more conservative cultural positions that might have caused people who like gun rights or are immigration skeptics to give him a look, even though he identified as a democratic socialist. So you can see on the one hand, Donald Trump, I think um, insincerely moving the Republican Party to the left on these New Deal politics issues, and these successful Democratic politicians having more conservative cultural views as suggesting that like these position taking tactics are actually quite important.
Yeah. Well, I guess my answer to that would be we're already doing that. I mean, I was in the Biden White House. We spent multiple years talking about how we were funding the police, by providing tons of money for state and local governments at the same time the Republicans were fighting against it, right? No national Democratic politician is running on defund the police or open borders or anything like that. The entire Harris campaign was, I voted for or I supported the strongest border enforcement bill in decades, and Donald Trump and the Republicans tried to undermine it and blocked us from getting it done. So to the extent that that is a suggested move, it strikes me that it's already happening. It's already happened. And to me, it's more about raising the salience of the issues that you are more in line with the public on, right? And again, I point out in my piece, and I put myself within this category. There's a problem, I think, on the Democratic Party of saying, what is our immigration policy? It's a 12-point plan called, rethinking our approach to the border. What does Donald Trump want to do? He wants to build a wall and have Mexico pay for it, right? So there's a way of talking about policy and raising the salience that I think is valuable, and trying to figure out how do we do that on issues like healthcare, to a lesser extent like education, and to sort of economic recovery that I think are better associated with the Democratic Party. There is an interesting analysis that basically, when the economy is doing poorly, people tend to flock to the Democratic Party because they view that party as better able to help people, unearth themselves from economic ruin. But then when the economy starts to stabilize, these sort of cultural issues come to the fore, and for better or for worse, the country still associates with the Republicans more than the Democrats on some of these core cultural issues. And so, again, it's kind of like, how much of this is driven by these meta trends about what's going on with the country? How many years of Democratic rule have we had versus Republican control? Whose turn is it, right, to sort of take the reins and be the change candidate? I think that those are really important questions. The thing we haven't gotten to is, how do you actually prepare yourself to govern better when you have the opportunity, right? And how much, this is the thing that haunts me. How much does actually governing well matter in terms of political reward? I tend to think that 95% of why people vote is for what they think you will do for them in the future. Very little of it is we're rewarding you for doing a good job for the past 4 years, 2 years, and so on. And so again, for Democrats, part of it is, okay, we've gotten, in 2024, we came to office. Well, less than 1% of the country was vaccinated. The unemployment rate was 6.5%. When we left office, the whole country was vaccinated. COVID was in the rearview mirror by and large, and we had the longest stretch of low unemployment since World War II. And people hated all of it, right? So what does that tell you about the importance of pursuing popular policy, of generally trying to govern well, and what matters in politics is more about your vision for the future? I really
Yeah.
think, and the last point is just, the Democrats have tended to do well when they've had a really lengthy multi-person primary that's very competitive. And I think that, my hope for 2028 is that we'll have another one of those like we did have in 2020, like we did have in 2008, where you had, Obama and Hillary and John Edwards and so on. Those are really good for the party in terms of helping winnow down the set of issues that are good, and get traction with the public.
Mhm.
And it gives voters a more chance to get comfortable with a particular type of vision. And I think
Mhm.
that that's going to be really important in 2028. And I hope you have 20 people running like you do in 2020, everybody espousing a different brand of what the Democratic Party could be.
Yeah, I think that that's all right. I would add one thing to it, and you alluded to it before, but it's this question of candidate quality, because I think that the agony that the Democratic Party is going through now, as people try in very clumsy ways to cling to more culturally right wing views to like sort of prove they're not out there lefties, is that they're just not very good at it, and then they're also like the people who are to their left don't actually trust them. So like they seem insincere to the people who hold the conservative cultural view, and they seem like traitors to to people in the coalition who are like, wait, you're selling me out, or you're selling out ideas that I care about. And like, in his own way, Donald Trump, but I'm thinking of like the talented Democrats that we've been talking about. So like Obama, Mamdani, Sanders, they had the charisma in their different ways. Obama's and Mamdani's were more similar than Sanders, but Sanders has his own kind of charisma, right? And then they used that charisma to develop trust with voters to their left, or that inhabited similar ideological space, so that people believed that Barack Obama was good at heart, and that Bernie Sanders was good at heart, and that Zoran Mamdani is good at heart. So that when Zoran Mamdani says, "I think I owe the police an apology for the positions I took before," most of the people to his left who supported him still support him, because they
Yep.
believe that at base he's not going to sell out their ideas about what like a more just society would look like. And that Barack Obama was able to wink wink say, I think marriage should be between one man and one woman. And most people who supported same-sex equality at the time didn't believe that this was Obama really throwing them under the bus, but really just doing. They had enough trust in him to give him the space he needed to do what he thought he needed to do to win.
Right.
Like, I think he would have won without taking that position, but he was able to take that position because he first convinced people that he was not actually like mean-hearted towards gay and lesbian couples, right?
Yep.
And then Bernie Sanders had culturally conservative views on police, guns, immigration. But like, nobody to this day, I think, believes that if Bernie Sanders had become president, he would have shackled people up and thrown them on planes without due process, right? Like the progressive vision of what an immigration restrictionist agenda looks like is something that's about domestic labor, and but it entails treating people who you deport with like humanity, right? And so nobody thought Bernie Sanders was aligning himself with nativists and xenophobes. They trusted that that wasn't what he was all about.
Right.
And when you have somebody like, as Democrats grapple with their deficits on certain cultural issues today, they have two problems. One is that Republicans have this apparatus that lets them elevate all kinds of nonsense into nationwide cultural flashpoints. So, like, which team does a trans girl get to play on is something that will affect maybe 40 high schools in the next few years, right? But apparently it needs to be a federal question, right? So, they elevate issues that could just be left to people of good faith to deal with in their own communities.
Right.
But then B, they put Democrats in this defensive position, and there are startlingly few Democrats who have the deftness to say, like, we will disagree in our party over like whether deference should go to the trans child because we stand up for the little guy. That's a very put upon person, and we should be there for them. Versus others who are like, look, people's rights are coming into conflict. There's not going to be a perfect answer that will please everybody. And in some cases, communities will come down one way, and in some cases, a trans girl playing on a sports team will be unfair and it'll go the other way. But none of us in this party are going to bully trans kids or abuse
Right.
them or terrorize them. That's for the Republicans, right? And you get people like Seth Moulton, or I could come up with other examples if you gave me more time, of Democrats trying to seize this centrist opinion in this ham-fisted way that doesn't work because
Right.
they don't have the trust to their left, and nobody to their right believes that they're more like they're truly sincerely committed to the oppression of trans people. So
Yeah.
it fails on those grounds. And like I don't know how you reorient the party to focusing on the challenge of finding leaders who can articulate the situation the way I was trying to just now, rather than trying to like race to capture the 50% plus one opinion. But I think that's more a matter of rhetorical deftness than it is about what's in anyone's heart or what their policy agenda says on the whole.
I completely agree. And again, whenever people are making these recommendations about the Democratic Party, and we should be laser focused on kitchen table issues, we shouldn't get pulled down these rabbit holes and focus on these distractions. My first thought is Donald Trump is the president.
Yeah.
Like, he posts 19 crazy things a day on whatever is bothering him. and he has all sorts of he's not laser focused on the issues. But again, there is as you said, number one, trying to um, develop a bank of credibility and trust with voters so that you can make some of these tactical shifts is important. And as I would say, again, I worked on the 2020 Warren campaign, and I guess I remember, we had a period of really good press for Senator Warren, and then we had a period of really bad press. And it didn't feel like we were doing something very different between the good time and the bad time. It was just like the tide turned on
Hmm.
us. And I remember looking at the press that other candidates were getting and saying, man, they're getting off so easy. But the truth of the matter is that getting good press is a skill. It is a really important political skill. And rather than, saying, how do those people pull it off? We should say there's something about this person, whether it's their ability to interact with the press or their team's ability to work with the press, that allows them to do that. And that's a skill that we should select for, because it's
Hmm.
really important in the modern environment. I think, like, to me, the ability to go on a variety of different types of interviews, more casual, more formal, experts, non-expert, and be able to present a compelling vision about what you want to accomplish in politics, that has to be table stakes for the next nominee. And there's a lot of people who can do that. Um, but I think, pick a set of issues that you think are going to be resonant with the American people, right? Like, we got to do something about the fact that the healthcare system is completely broken. We spend so much on it. It's bad for our small businesses. It's bad for economic growth. It's bad for people who, have their medical choices made by an insurance company. We got to do something to fix it. We got to do something about the fact that there's still learning loss from the pandemic, and across the country, K through 12 schools aren't as well funded as they should be, and our outcomes aren't as good as we should be. We need to make, a massive investment and change in how we address schools, right? An issue that's completely dropped off the national political radar. Whatever it is, you know, have have a compelling vision for the country that connects with your own experience, so that it's a credible message about something why you care about this issue in particular. And I think that's really important. And I think it's more important than policy nuance on a lot of these. Separately, and I'm doing a lot of this work on the side, we should figure out, in terms of a governing perspective, what went well and what didn't go well in from 2020 to 2024. And the next time that Democrats have more power in Washington, how do we make sure that we use that more effectively, both to produce better outcomes for people, but also to improve the political standing of the party by the way that we're governing. I think that's in many ways a distinct question from what is the right set of policy ideas that generates the highest political upside in a campaign setting, right?
Yeah. So I think I've even written that like good policy is table stakes, good governing is table stakes. Um, Over time, though, I have come to be wary of going much further beyond like a very general vision of like I think Democrats writ large and the next Democratic nominee should be able to explain what they think America would look like at the end of their term or at the end of two terms or maybe 20 years down the line if things go well. Like how would it be different? Like everyone would have access to healthcare, but it wouldn't be like bankrupting the country. And you could pluck ideas from every faction that are good, right? Like that. I think that the people who are working on antitrust stuff right now have a sort of small c conservative view of the future of America as being more independent entrepreneurs and close knit communities, and like jobs that pay well, and you explain that you make people inhabit that future, and then you promise that you're going to work towards it.
Yeah.
But then when you get into and I'm going to do it with this exact tax incentive or this new regulation or this program design, you can run into trouble. And I want to go back to the 2005 to 2008 period now, because I think it happened then in a way that people don't totally appreciate.